Welcome. My name is Carrie Ruby, and I'm the superintendent of the O'Fallon District 90 schools. It is my honor and privilege to welcome you to the District 90 Virtual Veterans Day program. Each November, we salute and celebrate our veterans by drawing large crowds of heroes into our school assemblies and community ceremonies. Unfortunately, this year we are unable to invite distinguished guests into our schools. Our talented music teachers and their fifth graders worked very hard to adjust to offer a virtual celebration of respect for our armed forces and a love for our country. Some of the most important lessons we teach students are that of patriotism, civic pride, and honor. Our students are our nation's future leaders, and it is our responsibility to help them learn about our veterans, their acts of heroism, and a true love for our country. Today and every day, we salute our heroes, our veterans, and their service to our United States. Thank you and enjoy the program.
America's White Table by Margot Thies Raven, illustrated by Mike Benny. It was just a little white table.
But it brought tears of pride to my Uncle John's eyes the Veterans Day he came for dinner, and stood by it, set for one person, even though nobody would be eating at it.
It was just a little white table.
But earlier that day, Mama had told Gretchen, Samantha, and me the little table we were setting for Veterans Day was just like the ones that have stood across America in the dining halls of the Army, Navy, Marine Corps, and Air Force since the Vietnam War ended. The tables honor the men and women who served in America's armed forces, especially those missing in action, our MIAs, and those held prisoner of war, our POWs.
It was just a little white table.
But it felt as big as America when he helped Mama put each item on it, and she told us why it was so important. We use a small table, girls, she explained first, to show one soldier's lonely battle against many. We cover it with a white cloth to honor a soldier's pure heart when he answers his country's call to duty.
We place a lemon slice and grains of salt on a plate to show a captive soldier's bitter fate and the tears of families waiting for loved ones to return, she continued. We push an empty chair to the table for the missing soldiers who are not here.
We lay a black napkin for the sorrow of captivity and turn over a glass for the meal that won't be eaten, she said. We place a white candle for peace and finally a red rose in a vase tied with a red ribbon for the hope that all of our missing will return someday. Mama finished speaking just as the sunlight spilled on the table and filled the overturned glass.
It was just a little white table.
What suddenly made me want to burst with a feeling I couldn't explain when Mama told us how much our setting the white table would mean to Uncle John that night. Then she told us something we didn't know.
Our Uncle John, who gave us big bear hugs and spun us with airplane twirls and called me his Katie girl, was a POW in Vietnam before we were born.
It was just a little white table.
But it gave us the courage to ask Mama what happened to Uncle John in Vietnam. She quietly told us his story. When Uncle John served in Vietnam, he was sent on a rescue mission, and his helicopter was shot down behind enemy lines, she began, and he and his 3 crew members were taken prisoner. One crew member named Mike had serious wounds from the crash, but Uncle John and the other men tried to help Mike get better and persuaded a guard to bring Mike medicine.
Then one day, when a guard looked away, Uncle John and the others had a chance to escape. But Mike was still too sick to go, so Uncle John stayed behind, because he wouldn't leave a fellow soldier so alone, so far from home.
But how did Uncle John get free, we asked Mama. Sometime later, Uncle John had a chance to escape again, and somehow he was able to take Mike with him, carrying him on his back and collecting just enough rainwater and big leaves to keep them alive until Uncle John found an American infantry unit to help them. But even though Uncle John did everything he could to bring Mike home alive, Mike's wounds were just too serious, and he died before the rescue helicopter landed. I know Mike was only 20 years old and he dreamed of playing football, but he loved America enough to give his life for his country when duty called.
And I know how much Uncle John loves America too, but he learned when helping Mike that a soldier risks his life for a fellow soldier because the best of your country lives in every man and woman who would lay down their life for you too.
It was just a little white table.
But it needed words of gratitude, like Mama's Thanksgiving meal. So before Uncle John arrived for dinner, Gretchen and Samantha and I decided to put 3 gifts of our own on the table to honor our veterans.
Gretchen colored pictures of all the objects on the table, and Samantha wrote out the words of My Country 'Tis of Thee as tribute in song, but I didn't know what I, a 10-year-old girl, could ever put on the table that was as important as each Veterans Day gift of freedom to me.
It was just a little white table.
But I looked at it all dinner long, and the quiet inside of me, I could almost hear the silent soldiers of the empty chair saying, "Remember us, please. We are real people like your Uncle John and Mike, who left families and friends, homes and dreams of our own to protect your birthright of liberty from disappearing as easily as sunlight from a glass."
It was just a little white table.
But it took my words away when I hugged Uncle John goodnight and wanted to thank him for serving our country so bravely. So I just hugged him harder and told him I loved him. Uncle John hugged me back even harder than I had hugged him.
And that's when I knew what I could put on my table. My promise to put the words from my heart into a little book about America's white table.
And in the book, I'd use Gretchen's pictures and Samantha's song and Mama's story about Uncle John and his friend Mike, because I hoped that everyone who read it would set a white table on Veterans Day too, so the brave Americans the little table honors won't ever feel forgotten by the country they love so much.
Then in the salt on the little white table, I traced the grains of their families' tears, what each man and woman who serves in America is to me, a hero. And that's when I saw the tears of pride fill my Uncle John's eyes.
They call me Uncle Sam, and I'm sure that the youngest folks in this audience are probably looking up here and thinking, who is that guy? Where did he come from, and why is he wearing those clothes? So I'm going to tell the story of Uncle Sam, and I'm going to include a little bit of history about our national anthem. Uncle Sam came about, it started around the time of the War of 1812. The War of 1812 is often referred to as America's forgotten war, so we don't talk much about it. It started off between the British and France. We really didn't want to get into it. We were drug into it by the British because they were restricting our trade and they were kidnapping sailors off of our ships, making them work on the British ships. And that's what drug us into the war. Now, about the same time that it just started, there was a gentleman in Troy, New York, by the name of Samuel Wilson. Samuel Wilson was a meat packer that had a contract with the government to supply beef and pork to the U.S. soldiers. To make sure that the meat that he was packing for them got to them, Samuel Wilson had a big U.S. stamped on the sides of all of the barrels of meat that was going to the soldiers. And the soldiers started joking about the fact that it was really coming from Uncle Sam because Samuel Wilson was well known in Troy, New York, and well liked. And everyone referred to him as Uncle Sam. So that name kind of stuck. And Uncle Sam and U.S., that's how it came about. Then in about 1860, there was a newspaper sketch guy that was drawing what he thought Uncle Sam would look like. And that's how we got the image of the Uncle Sam that we think of today. Well, I said earlier, that you wonder why Uncle Sam is in red, white, and blue. Well, I talked earlier about the fact that the British were kidnapping our sailors and making them work on the British ships. And about the time that that was going on, the British had already went into our nation's capital and actually burned it down. The White House was burnt. The only thing that saved it from being burnt to the ground was the fact that, believe it or not, a hurricane hit that area and all of the rain put out the fire. Otherwise, the White House would have been completely destroyed by the British. So now the British had their eyes on Baltimore, Maryland. They had their ships go into the Baltimore harbor, and they were getting ready to go into Baltimore and try to take the city, but they had one thing standing in front of them, and that was Fort McHenry. There was about 1,000 men, women, and children on that fort, and the British, all they had to do was take that fort, and they'd have it made. So they brought in about 16 to 20 very large ships, and they were getting ready to bomb Fort McHenry. And a young man named Francis Scott Key got on a rowboat and went out to one of the boats and was talking to one of the admirals about trying to negotiate the exchange of the American prisoners that the British had on board for some of the prisoners that U.S. had. He was successful in negotiating that. But unfortunately, because he was on the ship and overheard their plans about bombing Fort McHenry, they said to him, "I'm sorry, but we can't let you go till after we get done bombing the fort." For 25 hours, over 1,500 bombs and rockets were sent into that fort. 25 hours. And the men that were in the ships being held prisoner in the bay, they were wondering what was happening. Was the flag still flying? And they'd ask Francis Scott Key, they'd say, "Is the flag still up? Is it still flying?" And he'd look, and every now and then, because either a bomb would blow up or a rocket would blow up, or maybe it was a bolt of lightning. It was raining like cats and dogs. It was a horrible storm. And sometimes the lightning would go off, and he could see that flag was still waving. And he'd say, "It's still there. It's still waving." And sometimes a bomb would come so close that maybe the flagpole would start to lean a little bit, and the men would straighten it back up. Finally, the British gave up after 25 hours. And when the sun came up and the wind started to blow the smoke away from Fort McHenry, everyone could see that that American flag, although it was tattered and tore up, it was still flying. So Francis Scott Key obviously was very emotional about this, and he took an envelope out of his pocket, about that size right there, and he wrote a poem. He wrote a poem about everything he had seen that prior 25 hours. And here's a few of the words from that poem, the way it started. Oh, say can you see, by the dawn's early light, what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous flight over the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Yep, that became our national anthem. And now we sing that at many sports events and even here today. And a lot of times people just kind of mouth the words and they don't really know the history, what's behind it, and what happened. And now you do. So I hope in the future, when we hear the national anthem, that you'll stand tall. If you're wearing a hat, I hope you'll take it off. I hope you'll put your hand over your heart, because thousands of veterans have made major sacrifices for what that flag represents, and thousands of veterans have died for what that flag represents. Thank you, and God bless America.